In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, may the peace of God be upon his prophet and his companions, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our followers and viewers through social media platforms, followers of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. I have the pleasure to welcome you to the first lecture of the year 2024. And this is going to tackle a very important topic, which is under the title of Gulf Women's Disappointment in Public Spaces, Dithering Policy or Discouraging Culture. And this is going to be presented by our colleague from SADA, from the Carnegie International Peace Institute, where she's going to concentrate on the development of policies in the GCC. She has a PhD in GCC studies from Qatar University and a master's in Arabic studies from Qaboos University, and also has a BA in journalism, and also she is also has cooperation with a number of institutes, and also she has completed a certificate in public speaking, and also she also has an experience of in excess of 30 years in Omani networks, and also one of the recent positions that she had held is in public policies in Al Jazeera network, and also she is a candidate for the Shura Council in Oman, and she has spoken to many media outlets when it comes to the empowerment of women in the GCC. She was one of the first speakers that have spoken publicly in TED in 2023, and she had prepared a number of research papers for Freedom House and also a number of our institutes in Washington. She has also written a number of chapters in a number of peer-reviewed journals. She has covered a number of topics such as election campaigns and other topics as well. Dr. Rafiah is going to shine light on the role of women in the GCC and the challenges that women face in the GCC, despite the fact that the GCC achieved a great deal of development in the empowerment of women and education, but political participation is still not developed as a result of legal discrimination and traditions and customs. She's going to look into the reasons behind such a challenge, and also the traditions and also legal restrictions that limit the participation of women in the political sphere. And also she's going to take into account how policies can speed up the rate or the change, and also to deepen the understanding as to how we can reinforce the role of women in political realm. We would like to give the floor to the speaker for 45 minutes, and we're going to allocate 30 minutes to the questions and answers.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm very happy to see some familiar faces, like what Al Anud has said. Last time I spoke in Doha was at the TED Summit, and it is my good fortune that today is less frightening than TED, because for TED I had to memorize the entire talk, but and the benefit in the TED talk that nobody asked questions. Al Anud gave a very good introduction, and like she said, experience in the elections of 2003, but my interest in representing women goes Beyond that, and my experience, not through my direct experience in working in the field of defending women's rights and what I have personally and directly experienced, but also through meeting a large number of women who are either candidates or voters. This increased the importance of this topic, and not for the society, but also when I was preparing for my PhD, I focused on women's participation in elections in Oman from 1994 till 2019. The title of this talk, as I said, is about the disappointment of women, and this came after last October's elections in Oman, when not a single woman has won. It was not just a disappointment, but it was a surprise, really, that we get to this stage of affairs. I think the situation for women in Oman or Kuwait or other Gulf states is, I think the situation is deteriorating, despite many achievements, like Al-Anud has said, regarding education, although job opportunities remain somewhat limited. In my talk, I will try to explain why this topic is important and how will it impact our present and future. I will be talking about 3 or 4 different tracks, and finally I'll present my view for the future and future prospects. I'll get my glasses, if you excuse me for 1 second. Amongst the important topics on the participation of women, I will not look at this from one particular angle, and that is the rules, regulations, legislation, or different interpretations like Islamic Sharia or certain practices, but there are different factors at play here which led us to the situation we find ourselves in now, and the main reason are the social reasons, because society simply sees men as fitter and more able to lead the society than the country than women. So although there have been changes that happened to me since 2003, in fact this change has increased the more I met with women who were involved in the running of the country, in the Council of Ministers. Why is this topic important? And if we leave aside for 1 second the fact that if a woman speaks about this considered biased, I don't mind. I am a woman and I may be rather biased, but there is also some defects in the legislation. All Gulf countries, not just Oman, which give men more rights than women and do not allow women certain rights, and because women are considered as second-class citizens and the man is the citizen number 1, then followed by second. If a Gulf man marries a woman from outside the Gulf countries, his children will automatically get the citizenship, but if a woman, however, marries a man from outside the Gulf countries, her children are not given the same rights. Maybe after a certain period of time, 5 to 10 years, the woman who's non-Omani marries to an Omani man, gets Omani citizenship, but the same does not apply to men. There are other details, like, for example, generally speaking, all Gulf countries have ratified the agreements pertaining to all forms of discrimination against women, but the article that they all agree on is they agree on everything except for those articles which are contrary to Islamic Sharia. This was like the excuse, for example, the freedom of movement for women in Oman. Oman had reservations regarding certain articles, and that is to freedom of movement. And the same thing applies to the attribution of a child to his mother when through mixed marriages of mixed nationalities, and a woman cannot apply for a passport without the approval of her husband. So this means if she does not hold a passport, practically speaking, she cannot move. She's not free to travel. Although some men, they exploited this situation, but why don't people feel there is a legal problem? Because most Omani women have passports. They get their passports before marriage. And if she happens to get married without holding a passport and she applies for one without the husband's approval, we couldn't hear what the gentleman said because he's not using a microphone. When I came to Al Jazeera, they asked for certain documents. I remember they asked for my husband's approval for working. This is something strange. Nobody asked me about. They asked for a certificate which says that he doesn't mind me working and to get the Qatari ID or things like that. And he had to put his signature on 2 or 3 documents. He said to me that if I want to deprive you of the opportunity of working, I could easily do that. So if I had a problem with my husband, then that could have easily been done. So I was really surprised with the situation at Al Jazeera, and I met colleagues from other nationalities. For example, when they were divorced, they lost the opportunity to continue working because they no longer had what is known as a kafil, a sponsor. So therefore, women's opportunities in life are less than those for men. When a woman becomes a candidate for elections, for example, the legal equity between men and women is important. For example, for my PhD, I asked all the women candidates, they all talked about the election law, and there was nothing in the law itself which discriminates against women or separates men from women in a negative way, and women had the ability to do lots of things, but in actual fact they couldn't because the social conditions did not allow for that. For example, to attend meetings with exclusively men attending, Some states outside Muscat, this means a lot. For me, it was difficult for me to attend a meeting, a majlis, where all men are sitting to attend meetings and things. And I know many women in Oman also suffered from this. And women were also faced with people's opinion that men are better than you. I remember in one state a woman became a candidate and her brother became a candidate too at the same time. She is from a well-known tribe, a big tribe, and the tribe thought that it would be better if the brother became the candidate and not. She wanted to challenge them. She did not win, neither did her brother, because the votes were divided, but the entire tribe stood by the brother, the man. So the situation women find themselves in is full of grievances, and we must erase these grievances and achieve justice. Why I wanted to include like standards and at the Davos Forum and the United Nations, when they talk about closing the gap between the two sexes. Davos is an economic forum in the first place, but they talked about the huge amounts of money that Gulf countries lose, and the Gulf countries bring down the Middle East and North African countries, because the Gulf countries have the lowest rate of women in employment, and women's working opportunities are always less, and this situation, so far as competition is concerned, makes the young man think that it's enough for him because he happens to be male, that this is enough, and without necessarily being better and more qualified and better qualified. So this means that there are no proper standards simply because he was born male, and that does not give him any incentives to achieve higher in life, because he is more or less guaranteed the working opportunity. Even in promotion, men get promoted much quicker than women, and this provides men with less incentives rather than more, because women think that they'll not get what they deserve, and men know they'll get everything whether or not they deserve it or not. We know by and large that there are things that some things that if men do will be considered as good and well, and if women do that it will be the opposite. I was talking to some colleagues yesterday, like for example, if a man became angry and he started raising the tone of his voice, this will show control, but if women do that, it will show her as being less respectful, although it's less respectful in both cases. But for example, men get jealous and angry because they protect their women folk, but women, if they do that, they're considered jealous in a negative way. For example, when it comes to work or studying, you need some clear standards. Randomness when it comes to promotion at work, for example, is not enough just to give my son certain things simply because he is a boy and deprive my daughter from that because she is female. For example, my mother always preferred my brothers, and when I asked her why, she said, because they are boys. I cannot say that. I cannot say to my children that you are better because you're male. So this is something in our upbringing, in our work standards, and also when it comes to the passion and emotions people show and express. Sometimes people think this is a bad thing or a negative thing. Well, because women are more emotional, and although recent research about social intelligence and others show that these are important things, because if we talk about politics, we talk about thing as a separate thing, politics as a hard, dry topic. If we talk about other topics of a social nature, they're considered less serious, although all these things are linked. The tracks I talked about, I think there are mainly four tracks in the Gulf. One is an official government track adopted by the government regarding women and where should we place women. Should we give her a higher percentage or a lower percentage, or what percentage exactly when it comes to the membership of the Council of Ministers, elected councils, and other councils. Of course, here people vote and decide, but in some countries there are quotas given or appointed by the emir or the government. The problem with this governmental track, if we're talking about dithering policy or discouraging culture, I think here we are talking definitely about dithering policy, and it seems to me that after 9/11, unfortunately, and because the United States started interfering in everything and deciding what is terrorism and what, and the situation of women, all Gulf countries, with no exceptions, changed their policies and their methodologies because the United States saw it fit that all minorities should be respected, including women, although in some countries they form 50% of the population, but they were considered as the fragile and weaker parts of society. And the Gulf countries wanted to prove to the United States that they respect women, and unfortunately, this I say because of the United States insistence, and for the sake of the United States and the interests and the security of the United States. But anyway, maybe that was a blessing in disguise. Now the 20 to 25% of women who are appointed to councils of ministers or certain councils, in all events, this percentage is not proportional to the percentage of women to the entire population. In most of our countries, we are members of the United States, and these are the standards, and we're talking about rights that every portion of the population should be represented in any public policy institution, government, council, or whatever, because the question of representation is important. When you want to come up with policies, you have to have people who represent these different sections of society, and they have the different and multiple points of view which can help draw these policies. So far as the government in the Gulf countries, it seems to me they do not want to go beyond this. except the UAE, they have 50%. They have in the um, Federal Council 20 men and 20 women. Apart from that, the other governments are very dithering. In Oman, I know more about Oman because I am an Omani and I've been following this. But the rest of the Gulf countries are not that dissimilar. In the October 2023 elections, not a single woman has won, although some Omanis say that the Sultan waits before he announces the number of the Council of the State, which is the upper chamber of the Council of Oman. They are all appointed by the Sultan. I think there are 86, and the Council of the Shura became 60 because increase in the population, but they were 86 by 86. And the number of women was 12 to 15 as maximum from out of the 86 members of the council. This time there are 18 women. The idea is the Sultan will wait for the results of the elections of the Shura Council to determine the quota given to women, and the maximum number of seats won in elections by women for the membership of the Shura Council was 2 women. The other track is the social and cultural track. This all the different things we talked about, and the view of women, whether they are able to lead or not, women in the public spaces, in conservative societies, and our Gulf societies still view the man as more able than the women. In a package I prepared for Al Jazeera during the elections, one of the women candidates said that she does not think that societies by and large reject women, but because they worry and care for women because of the nature of political work, because men are more able to persevere and tolerate the difficulty. And this is another stereotype of women. We don't know who decided that, what can women do and cannot do. This reminds me of a conversation with a colleague at Al Jazeera when we were talking about the number of the senior producers. I think in that time we had no women senior producer or executive producer. All of them of men. My colleague said, it's better for you, and why do you want to be executive producers? You'll have to work nights, you have to leave your children. He said, you're lucky being women. It's better for you to remain and not to be promoted to this higher positions. So this is pre-assumption that everybody knows what women want when it comes to work or marriage or anything, but women are never asked themselves what do they want. So therefore the social track is very complex, in fact, and maybe it's even more complex than the government track or official track. And also within the social track, it seems to me there are some good news, and that is the youth generation, both male and female, who seem to want more. Now, if we watch the social media when there is any issue raised about women and women participation in elections, it is noticed that a large number of the young people are with this idea, and even the male portion seems to be going through some changes. But sometimes there are other voices which belong to people who are older. I know in Oman, I know the names of people, so I know they will immediately will involve religion. They mention a verse from the Quran or a narration by the Prophet to put an end to the conversation. And this is a kind of cyberbullying that even free discussion is closed, although there are voices amongst the youth who are prepared to listen and to change. And also there is the track of protecting the status quo. Many people want that. The government wants the status quo to be as it is. And they all say, women, what do women want more? They have the freedom, they have education, etc., etc. So the situation we're in now is perfect. This is a package I prepared when I used to work for Al Jazeera. The percentage of women in most Arab countries is. Where is the technician? I want to show you the important people that I've met. I was attending a conference at Kuwait University in 2018, and it was women's studies. I was presenting a paper on women, political leadership, and the media. We had important people attending, former ministers, people who are specialists in women in politics. So I thought that gave a summary. 2 minutes, not more, is the duration of this package. Women represent half the percentage of the population, sometimes 2/3. Despite that, they are not represented fairly in the elected councils. From the point of view of legal rights, women should be represented in proportion to their proportion and the population as a whole. The percentage of women does not go beyond 18% or even 15% in Arab countries, not because women are less capable, but the opportunities are less. And the situation of the absence of women from decision-making positions led to all the crises and wars that we have faced, according to some. This is a question of real change. Women think differently than men. Women think of different priorities in life because it's women who raise the children, who try to protect the unity of the family. So if given the choice, women will not waste money on armament. And also, these factors and others contribute to the lack of opportunity for women. Women represent half of society, if not a little bit more. So therefore, this is the bone of contention between men and women. If the situation became more balanced and women have more dignity, definitely societies will be more stable. By the year 2025, the world will lose some $37 billion because of the deprivation of women from playing a full part in the economies of their countries. The world loses a lot through excluding women, and this is what led the participants of this conference at the University of Kuwait to call for this as not a social problem, but this is an economic demand to make women more participate more. Rafiah Talei, Al Jazeera, Kuwait University. I'll go and sit down. The report said it all, the package said it all. And very quickly, I talked about Oman. Oman is the first Gulf country which gave women the right to vote and to be elected 1996. Not many people know that. Of course, at the time when women in Kuwait were struggling to be given the right to be elected, women in Oman had already been given that. But in those days, the voting was limited, not like now. And some women won, and they are still remembered as amongst the best representatives of the people. Some were re-elected in two consecutive, successive terms. Now we have 18 women who are members of the Council of the State, which is an advisory council, appointed council. And when I was doing my research, I was surprised that the percentage of women in society is half. Dr. Najjar said that I think the only country in the Gulf where women outnumber men by a little bit is Kuwait, in fact. And in 2002, I think, according to the 2021 census, women formed 38.5%, and in the municipality councils, women won some seats, and there are 4 women in the Council of Ministers. In Qatar, 4 women were appointed to the Shura Council in 2021. 27 women were candidates, but none of them won, and the women were given the right to vote in 1999 for the municipality elections. There are 3 women ministers in Qatar. Now I discovered that Qatari women represent 25% of the total population, which is the lowest in the region probably. In Kuwait, in 2005, apart from Saudi Arabia, in 2022, 1 seat out of 50. The previous term, there was 2 women who until June 2023, There were 15 members of the Council of Ministers, but no women ministers. Some resigned. I don't know if they were replaced by women or not. In Kuwait, the number of females in the population, according to the December 2022 census, outnumber the men. What is important for citizens and expat communities in Kuwait, at least, the number of women outnumber men. In Kuwait, to go out of the traditional way of lectures, last August, the parliament in Kuwait passed an article, a change, amendment article, which pertains to women, which makes it a condition to respect the Sharia laws, amongst other things like constitution, because some members of the parliament called for the abolition of this article because there are women who do not wear the veil, the hijab, and they consider that contrary to Islamic law. The parliament rejected these demands, and they looked at it as considering this kind of an amendment as mistreating the Sharia laws and regulations. For example, this can lead to controversial things like, for example, should men all have beards or not? Do they pray or they don't? Do they smoke or they don't? So how can we judge men then in those cases and compare that to judging women? Sometimes people talk about double standards in this because we do not want women to let their hair down, as they say, but we want some sort of normative standards that both men and women can be judged by. If we want some standards to guarantee some sort of respectful bounds for applying the Sharia, then that should apply to when it comes to honor and ethics and morals. Seems that they are applied to women more than men. In my opinion, the different interpretations of Sharia and some social concepts are at the root of this. In the UAE, there are 9 ministers, women ministers, 5 ministers of state. There is one with a full portfolio, and the others are like junior ministers. Also, the State Council, there was a decree by the President of the Union of the UAE to give a quota to women to be half the number of the membership of the council. In Saudi Arabia in 2015, women were allowed to vote. 20 women won, and then they were given the right to drive cars, and this was considered of equality. Of course, this came after a period where some women were imprisoned because they demanded that, and also they decided to give a quota of 20% for women's membership of the State Council, the Shura Council. The number of males out of the total population is 61%, females are 39%. So the number of, or the percentage of membership is 20%. despite women representing 39% of the population, they're still given a quota of 20%, which is less, but by and large, the role and the representation of women in politics is I refer to this article because it was written by a lady from the UAE and we publish articles on the region. This was one of the, in my opinion, one of the best articles. That's why we published it. And this is another important aspect. I will quote something. First, she said the presence of women in these positions, even positions of leadership, compensates for the absence of men. Like in the 70s and 80s, many Gulf men were sent abroad to study. So, she has her PhD from higher education in higher education from Cambridge University, and she argues that many men who were sent abroad to study did not return to their countries, and these positions were given to women to compensate for the absence of men, and this was similar to what happened in Europe after World War II, because men were fighting and a large number of them were killed. So even in Europe, the situation of women and in America, because the countries needed women as in exceptional circumstances, they were given. Amir al-Hussein also argues that from a point of view of the security and the campaign for the empowerment of women, we see that Gulf countries have appointed the first women as ministers a short time after the United States started waging its war on terrorism, because Gulf countries realized how the West is using the discourse of discrimination against women as a tool for its international foreign policy. So this was in response to that, rather than a response to remedying the situation of women. On the other hand, this kind of approach confuses the proper aspects of empowerment, because these women are appointed to such prominent positions. They think they owe it to the state to become mouthpieces for the state and defend the position of the state, and therefore become some form of a soft power and a front for the Gulf countries to show how civilized and advanced they are when addressing foreign masses. But at the local level, those women who try to achieve something, they are accused of feminism. Here, feminism becomes an accusation, and they are accused of spreading damaging ideas amongst virtuous women, and this makes some Gulf women keep silent, and their silence, in fact, when they choose to be present and they make their presence felt. This can be a point for discussion. I agree with what she said. Now we'll talk more about an academic aspect of this. The gender roles and the roles pertaining to genderism, which really focuses on women's roles as responsible for the family. I have a colleague who was a journalist in Oman. She was nominated for the election twice, but she never won. And she said the most difficult thing she noticed, she was pregnant, or she had a baby, and she could not really. Her husband was supporting, her brothers were supporting, but she had a problem spending a long time leaving their children at home, and she felt that there was not enough support. So her advice to women, to when they want to nominate themselves, when you to do that when you do not have children, basically. Of course, the cultural aspect of this is important, and even within the same state, some societies are more conservative than others, and this makes some women do not want to appear in public. In Oman, there was a time when the posters with women's faces were painted over or something. And in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia in particular, and for a long time, women were banned from public life. And this will impact people's opinions, because all these people, after all this time, started accepting the ideas that women are not qualified. So therefore, some people had fixed ideas about that, and many people still do not vote for women because they are convinced women are not able to carry out the tasks of public work. And also there are other forms of pressures. For example, the social pressures, like the example of the lady who was pressurized to withdraw because her brother was thought to be more suited. And this, in the eyes of society, is that men are more qualified or better able to represent people than women. And networking, also the lack of opportunity for women to network. The environment the man finds himself in, the friendship, the networks are more available to men than women. For example, women can go to women's societies, but when she has to attend a meeting which is full of men, even if she was daring enough to do that, she will find it difficult. I remember in my own personal experience, there was a council where the chiefs of the tribe were sitting, and I went with two female friends who came to support me. My two friends said, "No, we're not going to a meeting full of men with you," so I had to do it on my own. So I was in a dilemma. Should I present myself as a conservative, as a woman in a conservative society, should not go to this meeting, showing that I do not respect the traditions, or should I present myself as a coward who cannot face in public speaking? So this is the kind of judgments you have to juggle all the time, and the balance you have to strike all the time.
So anyway, so the lack of representation. So one of these factors, what are they important if I want to be part of one of the ambitious group of women? I have to see what the situation is. So this year, for instance, we have had 680 or 700 candidates, out of which only there were 30 women. So the number of women is becoming less and less. So we have had 40 women, 40 candidates, and only two of them made it. And the number of candidates is decreasing because they are not encouraged to hold high positions. And even when they're appointed, we see that the number of women that are appointed is very limited because the presence of women in such positions would motivate other women to follow suit. Also, we have lack of political awareness. So many women do not have the expertise that many men have, and this is due to the lack of representation by women in such positions. And consequently, how are they going to be able to get the expertise required? Also, we talk about a conservative environment. This impacts men and women alike. But when we take all the reasons that we have mentioned when it comes to women, we have to talk about the political conservative space and also the restriction of liberties. This is an added kind of burden of obstacle. So one of the women said that she's going to change the law that allows to transfer nationality or to give nationality to children if she is married to a non-GCC person or national. Men, of course, have more economic resources for many, many reasons. I talked about social pressures and so on. So when we talk about the GCC, so we see that there is a great deal of development that is witnessed as a result of that. So we have so many aspects that should be taken into account as a result of modernity and so on. So, have we become modern communities, or are we still traditional with manifestations of modernity? So, these are things that we have mentioned when we were discussing the topic. That is a slow process when it comes to change. Yes, bridges, infrastructure, roads, all of them happen in a very speedy way. But when it comes to the position of women, the development of women, this is a long process. We have been taking too long in such a status quo. And we know that such development in such a field is very much time consuming. And I know that. And I told people that GCC countries are known for something that is important. It can be positive and it can be also negative. So when we have a certain system, the policies are devised from up to down, from top to bottom, from the king, from the sultan, from the emir. He would order, and then the implementation will follow suit. In Oman, so we would ask the question, why wouldn't we be represented in the councils by 50%? We constitute 50% of the community. What is the objection? What is the obstacle? Is that the obstacle is that the community, the society is very conservative. Yes, there have been a number of ministers, female ministers female ministers that have been appointed, but we were not able to have more than 3 to 4 ministers. Nobody would say anything if this happens, if we have a larger number. So when it comes to the tribes and the clans, they want their daughters to have such positions because this would give them power and strength. So I do not think that only the fact that the community is conservative is the only reason. So, as I have mentioned, so we have the restriction of freedom of expression and also civil status laws, personal status law, and also the different explanations of Sharia. All of those countries say that they follow Sharia, and I like to say that the personal status law in Oman is one of the best personal status laws in the region. This is not only because I am Omani. I was in Kuwait, and one of the lawyers told me we hope that we would be able to have a similar personal status law. So the personal status law is based on Sharia. It is Sharia compliant, and this is something positive. But unfortunately, I think that most men in Oman, they do not know the law exactly. In actual fact, women have more rights than men as per the personal status law in Oman. That is why the explanation, the interpretation of the law is different. So when you talk about women and economic independence, so the economic dimension is very important when it comes to elections. Many women cannot hold an election campaign because they find themselves on their own, because they do not enjoy the support a man enjoys when the tribe supports that man financially and morally. There was one woman who nominated herself as a candidate, and she was very active in the community. And her brother also nominated himself. She supported him a great deal in order to support people, give them buses to go and vote. But when she nominated herself as a candidate, he only came on the day of the vote, and he said that he and his wife came to vote for her. That was the only effort that was exerted. So when we talk about all these matters, all of them, they impact the personality of women, their ability to confront the community, to feel as a dignified person. So these are matters that we should understand. So the objective of all these laws is for people to be dignified. If women are not dignified in their own community, and this is one of the things that God has given us, endowed us with. God says that we have honored human beings, not men, not women, but human beings, because we know that Islam has set the bases, but it is us who were not able to develop those steps and foundations that had been set and to implement them. So that is why we find so many men that resort to certain areas that underline the power of men over women, and not the ones that talk about the equality between men and women, but we try only to concentrate on the position of men over women and so on. So if we talk about this patriarchal system, and this is not only limited to the GCC or to the Arab states, this is something that is particular to all civilizations. Yes, governments in the GCC have a majority of men that practice power, and it is very, very difficult for any group to find solutions to that. That is why we see such wars prevail in the world. But when we talk about the patriarchal systems, so this shows that man is put in a position to decide what is good for women, what is not good for women, what is in their interest, what is not in their interest, and this impacts voters. When the state does not appoint many women, this puts men in a position of power and supremacy. So this is not a matter of racism, no. as it is the case in the US, but there is a system, a patriarchal system. So, in one of the years, in the southern part of Oman, in Salalah in particular, so there was a female candidate. She was able to achieve a great deal of advancement amongst all people. And she was able to prove many people wrong who used to say that only people of certain color would be able to make it to the front. And so this woman entered the elections, nominated herself, but she was defeated after that. So there is another thing. What really annoyed me is that this woman knew the situation on the ground, but she liked the small development that was achieved. Yes, we were able to go as far as this, but after that, we have seen a man that nominated himself, and she worked on the efforts that were made by that particular person, that male candidate, and he made it. Because there were so many women behind him, supporting him. So, men, whatever his social level, would have precedence over men, over women. So, a man who is a son of a sheikh, a rich man, these are the criteria for the person to be successful. If it is a woman, she should be rich and the daughter of a sheikh. So this is these are the criteria, and this was true. If we go into the reality on the ground, those who made it in Oman are part of this social level. They are daughters of sheikhs or businessmen, and these were the ones who made it. So, if we would like to have just societies, communities, what should be undertaken? What efforts should be made? So, I think we should not have dithering policies. We have policies in the GCC. These policies do not take much the gender. So we not talk only about women, we talk also about men. This is very important. Gender is not only women, it is also men. So when we try to appoint somebody, we do not do that in keeping with this tribe or this businessman. We have to take into account the number of women that should be appointed, the number of men that should be appointed in keeping with a certain quota, taking into account the situation. So in Oman, in the council, the state council, we see an increase in the number of women, but the state does not want to commit to a certain kind of quota because they want to remain flexible. So these are policies that take into account gender. This would have an impact on the position of women because they are made in order to prepare a kind of a comprehensive kind of environment. So when we take into account the many Arab states, so many of them, they try to represent the different segments of the community. But there is no specific quota in their view that should be dedicated to women. An increase in representation when women see a large number of women that are being represented in the different authorities, and this would encourage other women to follow suit and become candidates. So legal supports, institutional support. We talked about that in all aspects of life, and these policies can lead to new legal frameworks that would guarantee equality or equal opportunities. So there was a lady who was a member of the Shura Council, the consultative council, and she told me that they were discussing the maternity leave, and in Oman it used to be 2 months, and then it was reduced to a month and a half. And in the committees where they had meetings, they did not invite the two women, the only women that were representatives, because they are the ones that are bound to understand and to know how long a woman would need after giving birth to a child. This was really strange. You find men, when they get married, for instance, if his wife is pregnant and she needs to go back to work after a month and a half, then they think that it is the problem of the wife, of the mother. There are a number of countries, such as Scandinavian countries, they have a maternity leave of 2 years, and one of the two parents, the father or the mother, can take such a leave. For instance, as a mother, I take the first year, and the second year it is the father perhaps who would take 1 year. So this is what is required. Even when you try to breastfeed, you need to do that for 2 years. So we need to have a framework that would help men and women alike to have a stable social life, to strike a balance between work and the household. So we talked about the laws, and we have to, because this is very important. As you know, quota has a specific objective, and this would enable us to overcome the obstacles. So people get used to certain matters, certain things, and it becomes normal. So women in the past used to not to go to school, and people got used to that. But then the situation changed. So women were not part and parcel of the public space, and that is why the state was incumbent on it to adopt a strategic policy that would lead to political and social change. And women, as a result of that, would feel willing to take part in such change. There is a paper that I wrote that has not been published yet, and I talked about this particular point that I would like to concentrate on. It is not only important to have women represented in higher positions or leading positions. When we talk about empowerment, we mean also the ability to take decisions. If we talk about a minister, she would have certain powers, the ability to take certain decisions. So where would women be appointed when it comes to the hierarchy of power? So is she going to be equal to her peer, male peer? Would she have the same powers when it comes to taking decisions, or should she always resort to somebody of a higher position? So is the presence of women in such positions in order only to make the government look pretty and appealing, or their presence has an objective as a result of that? So the importance of having women in such positions. So when we can't have a law does not is not particular to one gender. It's not only particular to men or women. So it is relevant to the community as a whole. So that is why we have to know the priorities of the policies. So the participation of women would perhaps make women concentrate on the policies that would give rights to women because they are much more knowledgeable in such kind of topics than men, and also when it comes to the frameworks and services that should be taken into account. All of this would motivate the generations that are ambitious enough to make it. When we have had new appointments in Oman, everybody would tell you, we hope that you're going to be there as well, but we do not know what criteria are taken into account. So it's more or clear, the more clear the criteria are, this would motivate people in the GCC to make it because we have a certain ladder, and this ladder can be ascended by any woman. She doesn't need to be the daughter of X or Y for her to be able to ascend this ladder. So, yes, women are part of those tribes. So, even when women are chosen, this is not in actual fact a kind of an attempt to prop up women in general. What is happening? It is an attempt to give an opportunity to women who are daughters of X and Y. So I would like to conclude by saying there was a Qatari lady who came to me. She is a university student, and she told me, I hope that one day I would become a minister. She was, and I really liked what she said. So I felt that I was inspired, she said. So, what can I do in order for me to become a minister? So, I was surprised, really. I didn't know what to tell you. I told her that you have to concentrate on your studies. I didn't want not to say anything, even in Oman when we speak and you say to be a minister or not. This is not in your hands. You're just being told, you'll be told that you're going to be honored to become a minister. And the first statement by a minister is to thank those who have honored me, those who have chosen me, and many would say, why would a professor of literature to what would make her Minister of Information? So these are questions that are posed, and because they would not understand, the coming generation, the younger generation does not understand the criteria that are taken into account in a political career or pathway. For women, this system is much harsher and much more closed. So this is all what I have, and if you have questions, I would be glad to respond to them. We would like to thank Rafiah for her presentation, and I think that this presentation is the beginning that would lead us to understand the obstacles that policies and communities face. And I kindly ask you to be brief, to pose direct questions in order to be able to get as many questions as possible. And also, if you can introduce yourselves as well. Khadija, go ahead. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. اسمي خديجة ولاد عدي. I'm a journalist and a trainer. My name is Khadija Oulad Addi. I'm very much interested in women's issues. Some Arab experiences, particularly when it comes to the Tunisian experience, they have imposed the quota system for many, many years, and women get represented by 50% in parliament. And after the political coup, this parliament was closed, and those who took decisions were far away from women's circles, and all those years were not able to give the opportunity to women in the second phase. I have this this experience. In Morocco, I have a second experience. We do not have a quota system, but there is a kind of a social and political dynamism that has led women to take part in politics. Some political parties have nominated women to represent them in government, but some of them brought their husbands or husband who is a lawyer. Some of them brought their brothers, and in actual fact, those women were not the ones who practiced the political job. So the community looked at women to be just representative of a tribe, similar to a tribe or political parties. So my question, can laws and procedures, political procedures, can they lead to a system whereby women would be active without the imposition of a quota system? So my question, so the social upbringing that we enjoy in the community as women, as men, is it behind the responsibility? Or so the upbringing is carried out by women. So what is the role of women in such upbringing? The second question, so don't you think that this issue is an issue of space between competitors? So this is a kind of a dispute amongst competitors when a colleague thinks of his colleagues, particularly when we lack a clear policy as to how I can become a head of department, when we do not have a clear pathway as to which we can get promoted and go up the ladder. And as a result of such lack of a system, this would negatively impact the weakest link. So they would not think about women. So who discusses such kind of promotions? It is men, and the priority would not be given to women. So these are kinds of boy clubs, and irrespective of the achievements made by women, yes, they are respected, but they have to stay where they are. You find that sometimes men and women get good results at school, at university, but when you look at the achievements made, you find that men make it much quicker to the position at work. Is it a dispute over those spaces? Sometimes you find a person cannot make it because he does not have a foreign passport. We can perhaps not give him this position or give her this position because the he would not be able or she would not be able to leave, go attend things outside the state as a result of his limiting passports, as opposed to a person with a foreign passport that would give him or her more flexibility and so on. Thank you very much, Mrs. Rafiah, for this intervention. I have two observations and a question. So I think that the dithering policies in the GCC and in the Arab world in general, these are the reasons behind what we witness in this world. So as part of this discouraging culture, I think the main impediment is due to the culture that the women represent. So Morocco perhaps is advanced when it comes to the representation of women in parliament is higher due to this happened or started in the 60s, and we find that most women voters, they vote for a man more than they vote for women, irrespective of the fact that some women are much more talented. So I would like to give you some statistics when it comes to the number of successful girls in high school. Engineering and medicine is higher than boys. So it is not the talent or the capabilities that are the impediment. But when it comes to the withering policies, we in Morocco and even in some European countries, it was proven in keeping with some statistics and indicators that women are less corrupt in political work, taking into account all the indicators. So men tend to show more corruption than women in political positions. And my question, in the GCC, we have a similar culture, and the ability of women to travel is possible. So why wouldn't women establish a network, GCC network? Many women were able to make it to study. Why wouldn't they try to pressure the conservative culture, the system, for those women to be able to hold the adequate position they should enjoy in politics, in culture, in economy, in sociology, and so on? Thank you. My name is Rahma. I'm a first year philosophy student in Sudan. The first candidate for parliament was in 1965. So we have enough women within the ministries. So the representation of women in Sudan is good. So the problem lies in the decision-making process, as you have mentioned. So women are just there without taking real decisions because decisions are taken by men. So women, they do not work in favor of other women. So the question that should be posed, so is it, should we concentrate on the number or on quantity or quality? So women, should they be given their rights or should they resist in order to get their rights? So when you try to be part of a certain council, should you break the traditions, the customs? Should you, in your position, preserve those customs and traditions? Why such burden should be shouldered by you and not shouldered by men? That's all. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for this valuable presentation. I would like, first of all, to welcome you to the Arab Center, and we hope that this lecture is going to be a prelude for further cooperation. I have a number of observations. I agree with my predecessors in their interventions. This is not a GCC problem per se. This is an Arab and a world problem. And there is literature that shows the participation of women. We have many, many papers that have been written in this regard, and this applies to Egypt and Tunisia. This is a lecture that is very important. So, what we lack is critical papers of such a topic that are relevant to the GCC. So we hope that we're going to have further steps in this regard. Perhaps my question is theoretical. And what I would like to say, and you talked about towards a much more just community or just communities. So when we talk about forced modernization through policies, through support, and this is not in disparity with all the outcomes that have been reached in different parts of the Arab world, including the countries in North Africa. I mean, modernization has always been a process that was led by the government, by the state. I agree with the quota system, with the representation of women, but what I have witnessed, particularly in the GCC, in my presence in the Qatari community, I see some community dynamism, and I hope perhaps to have a feminist GCC movement. What are their demands? Perhaps this would be a topic that can be discussed. Perhaps activists that are enrolled or under an umbrella, such as a CSO umbrella, or as female individual activists. I think that Qatari women and them resorting to education, and particularly higher education, and this is just a feeling, I'm not leaning on any figures. I feel that women are much more inclined to have a higher education than men. So after a few years, do you think that women are going to be able to put pressure to have some change through a process that would be bottom up and not from the top to the bottom? I do apologize because I'm being lengthy, but this is a very interesting topic. So I think we have to reproduce the stereotypical roles that used to exist. Perhaps women would try to hold positions different from what she is used to, maybe to the military and so on. And even the distribution of policies was also part and parcel of this view. I do agree with all the historical background that you underlined and the 11th of September and the aftermath of the 11th of September. This is not only limited to what was happening, it is those who carried out the 9 of 11 attacks were Saudis, and Iraq was different. So the linkage between the role of women was closely linked to a democratic system. So that is why the quota system was discussed from the beginning. So it is far beyond any other topic. So I do think that the assessment of the quota experience is very important. Yes, it is an empowering tool, but when we say that we have 50 or 25 percent of women parliamentarians, so how can we gauge the effectiveness of women who became parliamentarians? So there was a paper that was produced by one of my colleagues. So she tried to see the differences that have happened as a result of the appointment of women in those political parties. So, microphone, please. The speaker is not speaking closely in the microphone. So that is why there is another point that I think is very important. So we always concentrate on the institutional role, but what about the non-institutional participation? For instance, the efforts exerted by Her Highness Sheikha Moza. So her position in the royal family, ruling family, is what enabled her to carry out such a role. So when we talk about the 25%, are we talking about the citizens or we cannot hear what the lady is saying? Unfortunately, she is not using a microphone. We kindly ask the speaker to use a microphone. Microphone, please. As I have mentioned, I did not know the number of population. In Kuwait, I knew the total number, but in Qatar, the situation was different. So, so the least number was in Qatar. Anyway, so when we talk about the number that was mentioned, so we're talking about 200,000 is men and 87,000 is women. Thank you very much for this observation. I think we take these questions, and because we have so many questions that have been posed, so I'm going to be very brief. So I think Khadija, I agree with what she said. So what are the limits of women in their role when they raise kids? So the idea of the enabling environment. So this does not include only the school or the house. It is all these things. What would make men or women enabled? So we need to have systems. So what is the limits of such a role? So if I talk as a woman, that has three children, two girls, one boy, but I have to take into account that priority is not going to be given to a boy or a girl based on his or her gender. So it is based on the way they deal, their educational achievements. So that is why boys and girls are going to be raised as equal. My mother always thinks or thought that my brothers are better. Yes, she loved me, yes, but she would always tell me that your brothers are better. I know she appreciated me, but this is her mentality. And I hope that such mentality would not exist in other generations. That is why we need to understand these things. We have to understand what do we want, what to expect, what our daughters going to expect from the community. So, for instance, there was a study. Sons and daughters of rich people would get better position with higher salaries compared to those who come from lower social entourage or space. So this would give the impression that he deserves the position. So when girls are raised as being equal, as being citizens with equal capabilities, so this is very important. So that is why when we talk about a democratic system, men and women should be equal. So not because I'm a man, I should get this or I'm entitled to this or that. So that is why we have to have this enabling environment for citizens, for men and women to be able to make it. So. So you talked about the political parties and so on. So we have in Oman, we had the first minister that was appointed, and she got married as a minister. And this does not apply to all Omani men, but he felt that his role was limited compared to her role as a minister. So he started demanding to do more things as if to him become the minister and she stays at home, and as a result of that they divorced. So I do not mind to have competition, but competition should be in keeping with clear standards. So women, yes, they love education, they love, but we're talking about the aftermath of education. After a woman gets her education, she does not get the rights she deserves in her life. So recognizing these qualifications to have a network for GCC women, this is also another point that is very important. Women cannot work on their own, because when we talk about women, what is really sad, as if it is the responsibility of women for them to go and try to get their rights by force, as if this is not the responsibility of the other parties. On the contrary, such injustice is being subdued by women as a result of the other parties who do not give her her rights. So that is why this is a phenomenon that exists in humanity, but in some communities, such phenomenon exists due to traditions, to culture, and so on and so forth. So the conference that I talked about was tackled this matter, and there was a study that included the work of women in the GCC. So I think it upsets me when we talk about the rights of women in the GCC or in the Arab world or Muslim communities, and we talk about dependence on the West as if this is due to the West. No, this is an inherent right. I am persuaded that Islam has given us a great deal, but unfortunately, we concentrate on certain things that are not related as to how women can enjoy dignity and justice in Muslim communities. That is why we, unfortunately, we are amongst the communities that the world thinks subdues the most level or the highest level of injustice. No, Islam has given us rights that do not exist in so many Western countries and laws. So that is why the reproduction of knowledge is very important. The rewriting of things related to women. So this is very important. Because then the view is different altogether. When we talk about feminism, so the first thing that people think about is the West. It annoys me, but I do not have a concept or a definition that would reflect the position or the viewpoint of women. This is very important. When it comes to Sudan, I was 13 or 14 years. I used to read Zahrat al-Khalij. I was very much happy when I knew that the first judge was from Sudan. So when there are revolutions and so on and so forth, they just try to cancel all the efforts that have been made prior to that. So there was another topic that was tackled. Do we need quality or quantity? This is a topic that covered much of my PhD thesis, and Dr. Haider also talked about this. We do not have a way as to how we can gauge the effectiveness. Do we think in the same way when we are in a parliamentarian meeting? Yes, we have many men represented in parliament, but we have to visibly see the impact. Yes, there is a visible strength when we talk about the number of men represented as opposed to the very limited number of women that are represented. That is why the number of represented women is very important. In Oman, we have so many men that are represented. Many of them have not finished their studies, but nobody talks about their effectiveness. When I talk about the first two women that have been represented, they are still quoted as the best Shura Council's representatives. They have been very much effective. But when we go to the last 4 years, are all the representatives measured in terms of effectiveness? Yes, I think that effectiveness should be a very important aspect, but also the standards should be unified, similar to the appraisal that we have at the end of a certain period of time at work. And here, going back to citizenship again, when we talk about democratic systems as opposed to non democratic systems, is there a democratization system? Should we wait for the government to give us all the rights that we should enjoy? I am not with the forced modernization that is top down kind of procedure. No. Yes, the state wants to preserve the rights and also the customs of the state. So they think that if they appoint more women, and this to me is positive, but they think that perhaps many women, many people are going to be happy as a result of appointing more women. But up to now, I mean, the situation has led to so much resistance. We have to resist this kind of social pressure. Why am I forced to resist this pressure? Because I'm part of the community, and as member of a Shura Council, I do not represent only women, irrespective of my inclinations. I do not want to look at the community as something that is extreme and non-representative. We in Oman, we do not have political parties, we do not have, so we are considered independent, even when you're independent and you present yourself, but you have to take into account so many things. So resistance and waiting for rights. So when rights come from the bottom, they are much more powerful. But we in the GCC see so much pressure exerted by women for them to be able to give the rights to citizenship to the children, to their children. So, talking about a GCC feminist movement, there is no such thing as a movement in the GCC. I know a great deal was written about that, but in my view, there were two separate movements, one in Saudi Arabia and the second one was in Kuwait. It reached its peak when women were able to put pressure for women to be able to enjoy their political rights, and those women are still resisting. And also in Saudi Arabia, there are so many movements, such as rights for driving a car and so on. So we have had so many campaigns carried out by Saudi Arabian women. These were very interesting. Many women were able to concert efforts through social media and so on in order to get their rights. But in the light of the non-democratic systems in which we live, even when women were given the right to drive cars in Saudi Arabia, so So, although there is no law in Saudi Arabia that objects to the driving of women, there was no practically a law. It was just a kind of a customary law. And but this remains as something that is granted by the head of the state, the president, or the crown prince, or the so on, not discussed as her right, but something that is granted by a higher authority. So we have Mrs. Ahad, so the first lady, and also Sheikha Moza, the first lady of Oman, created a great deal of difference. Either Sheikha Moza in Qatar or the crown or the first lady of Oman. When I first came to Qatar, my daughter was very young, and there was an invitation by Her Highness Sheikha Moza to female GCC journalists, and I insisted to come, and I came to the Sheraton. It was the only hotel in that area in a desert, and we met Her Highness Sheikha Moza, and we discussed so many matters. So during that time, there was no women that drove cars. Even when I asked women at the time, they used to feel that it was zaib for women to drive a car unless she is from a lower social entourage. So when we talk about niqab, some talk about niqab from a conservative viewpoint or from a religious viewpoint. Many of the women then were wearing niqab, but the situation has changed. If the journalists that represented Qatar were not Qataris that participated from Qatar, and there were journalists from Kuwait and from Saudi Arabia. There were journalists from Bahrain, from Oman, and Kuwait. Those representatives from Saudi Arabia were authors. And since then, I started following the role played by Her Highness Sheikha Moza. She created a huge change when it comes to the pathway enjoyed by women. And this leads me to question the following. So, who is the role model? So, Sheikha Moza limited her role, and she left a vacuum that was not covered by any other women in Oman. When Ahad Busaidi appeared, we have started seeing her pictures, and this was the first time for Omani people to see the wife of the Sultan, and I was amongst the people who welcomed such a move. So she established a charitable organization, and as a lady, she's not hijabi woman. Yes, she wears a shela or a scarf. She was very much criticized because of the fact that she did not fully covered her head. Many of them said she should not appear as a woman and that she is the wife of the Sultan and that she should not appear in public in such a way. And recently we have seen them together with the Sultan. In my view, it is nice for the ruling family to be close to the people, to celebrate the graduation and so on of their children, and to reinforce harmony and social peace and so on and so forth. But there are certain personalities that used to criticize her, and now I do not see her presence as much as it used to be in the past. And she headed the graduation of graduates from the police college. She does not have a clear gender or women interests. So So, similar, for instance, to the First Lady, you would see them, for instance, interested in gardening, healthy eating. Perhaps Hillary Clinton was the first to be seen with a very clear interest, and even her was not able to make it and succeed. Yes, we in the GCC in general, we need to have such kind of models. Yes, it is important to have such thing. We do not know. We do not have such a system for the older generation to give down the experience they have to other generations to come or to the younger generation. So, because we need those generations, younger generations, not to start from scratch, but to benefit from the experiences of people that preceded them. Because it is incumbent on us, not only women, because we do not want the previous generations to start from scratch. We want them to start where the previous ones have ended in order to benefit from their experiences. That is why I think that we have to rethink about how to look into matters that are not only relevant to women, but that are relevant to all the policies that are relevant to women, because we live in a non-democratic community, because this community or entourage is very much restrictive of those liberties. And we have double standards for citizens and non-citizens. That is why, imagine with all such history, which is against women, we have such an environment. And this is very difficult. This is not just a matter of women that work for other women to have better rights, to achieve equality. This is the responsibility of the community as a whole. One last question in less than a minute. This is from social media. This is from Brother Abdel Fattah. He is asking, so should this strive head in order to empower CSOs for men and women to work together in order to enable both genders? So when we talk about the state, the private sector, and so on, and when we talk about CSOs, when we talk about systems or countries that want to enjoy a certain level of freedom and democracy, this can be achieved through those CSOs. So these CSOs are very important, and when it comes to laws, they ban any political activities, and as a result of that, you cannot even criticize those laws. You cannot even have an agenda for change. I used to be in the Omani Association in Muscat, one of the oldest associations, but we never were able to discuss political matters. Yes, we can talk about how women can respect their husbands or raise their children or some other topics, but they cannot discuss political matters, rights, justice, and change of laws. They were not able to do that. Even the education of candidates in the elections. These topics used to be considered political topics. We would like to thank the lecturer who talked about the role of women in the GCC and the challenges that are faced by women. And this enables us to ponder as to how would be able to reinforce the role of women in the building of the society. We'd like to thank Dr. Rafiah once again. Thank you very much.